Hello, and welcome to How to Leverage Personalization in Your CRO Strategy webinar. I'm Jen Decker, and I'll be your host today. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website and on our YouTube channel. In addition, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into your question panel, as we'll have a brief Q&A at the end of the webinar. Now, I'd like to introduce today's presenter from Journey Further team, Conversion Director, Jonny Longden. Welcome, Jonny.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Just first of all, as well, apologies. I'm slightly losing my voice today, so I think I'll be all right. But if I'm a bit croaky, that's why. Great. You can hear me okay, I take it? Jen, can you just confirm?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, good. Okay, great. Just a bit of an introduction. So I currently run the experimentation function at an agency called Journey Further. We're a performance marketing agency on a wider level. I've been doing conversion optimization, experimentation, digital experience stuff and personalization for nearly 14 years now. And along the way, that's encompassed agency teams and management consultancy, but I've also been client side. So most notably, I built and ran an experimentation function at Sky in the UK. And yeah, Journey Further now, we predominantly work with businesses to help them put experimentation and personalization at the heart of their e-commerce and digital strategies. So that's me. So today, very simply, we're talking about personalization, and I've got a very short presentation that'll probably take about 10-15 minutes, and then we're going to go through some Q&A. So we've got a few questions that are very common questions that I often hear about personalization, and then we've also asked everyone for questions beforehand, and feel free to add questions on the chat or in the Q&A on Zoom as well. So that's what we're going to do. Like I say, stick questions in on chat if you have them, or just chat if you want to, or on the Q&A as well, and we'll try and get to those. Now, we might not actually get around, like usually when I do these, we've got quite a few people chatting and asking questions, and we might not actually get to all those questions. If for any reason we don't, we'll follow up afterwards and answer your question for you. Cool, so let's get into it. So really the focus of this is personalization really worth it? And the background of this really is working with a lot of the clients that we do. We find that they are constantly approached by a variety of different companies offering personalization. And personalization has become really a kind of a buzzword. And it probably is the buzzword of the moment, really. Like, it's the thing that we hear people talk about a lot. But at the same time, it's also not particularly well understood. And the fact that it's such a big buzzword has given rise to a kind of an enormous industry of different vendors, consultants, and technology companies, all selling personalization. And what happens is that people sort of see it as a bit of a bandwagon that they need to get on. They think we need to do some personalization. And so a lot of companies kind of rush into it for its own sake, really. So, they just think we need to do personalization. How do we do it? What technology do we need? Let's do it. Let's spend money on it. And the problem is that a lot of the time, it's not actually really worth it when you think about it. And there are some businesses that really benefit from personalization, and there's some businesses that don't. And so the focus of this webinar really is to try and help you think about, should you be doing personalization? If you should, what is the right way to do it? And how do you approach it in the right way? So mostly what I wanted to do as a bit of stimulus really is just go through what I think are some really good examples of personalization and some bad examples or some not so good examples of personalization, in order to try and pull out some of the different attributes that make, you know, personalization good or bad. So there are a few examples here. So first one, very, very common example when we talk about personalization is Netflix. And I'm sure everybody's very familiar with Netflix, but Netflix is a really good example of personalization done right, because personalization is the very, very heart and soul of Netflix's entire business strategy and existence as a company, really. So on the one hand, Netflix, I'm sure, very fundamentally recognize at the very heart of their business that if you don't like content and if you don't watch more content and you don't enjoy that content, then you will not subscribe to them for very much longer. And on top of that, different people have very different preferences and different tastes for entertainment content. And so they exist in order to provide you with the content that you are going to enjoy and that you are going to find most interesting. And so really, like, you know, their whole business is set up around that. Their whole model is set up around their algorithms that help you find easily and quickly the things that are going to be entertaining to you as a person. But it doesn't really stop there. So because, as I'm sure most people are aware, Netflix actually use the data that they have on individual people, and they in order to inform the content that they're making as well. So they're not only personalizing the way the platform works in terms of the way it delivers content, but they're actually personalizing the content in a sense, because what they're doing is using the data that they have and the learning that they have around the types of things that people watch, how long they watch them for, and how viral those sorts of things become, in order to inform the content that should be produced. So the whole model is really a synergy between data and learning around our preferences and behaviors and the way we watch and consume content, and the content itself, in terms of what they're actually producing, and ultimately how those two things marry together and how they're delivered. And but really, going back to what I was saying at the beginning, the point of this as an example is that it is the heart of their business strategy. It's really how they would describe what Netflix is as a business. Slightly more down to earth example. So Tesco groceries. So Tesco, if you're not aware, is one of the largest, if not the largest, supermarket in the UK. And this is their online grocery platform. And the reason this is interesting is that if you're not aware of Tesco's in the UK, Tesco have a club card, which is if you go into a physical retail store, if you go into one of the supermarkets and you buy stuff in the supermarket, then you scan your club card, which is effectively a loyalty card. And that is recognizing all of the different individual products that you purchased, in order that they can understand you, that they can give offers to you. But this is their online grocery platform. So I actually went into Tesco's. I don't really shop from Tesco's that often, but I went into Tesco's and I bought some stuff, and quite a bit of it would have been vegetarian because my wife's vegetarian. And so then the next time I log in to Tesco's online, I can see offers here, and one of those offers is a vegetarian product. Now, I couldn't say for a definite, but I would bet a bit of money on the fact that what's happened here is that the fact that I purchased vegetarian products in the store and that was registered on my club card has then gone into an algorithm which is then used to show me vegetarian products as offers in the online store. And the reason behind this being an example that I wanted to pull out is that what it's doing is it's using information about me that it knows from outside of this particular session. So I've come onto the online grocery store ostensibly with the intention of buying food. And however, it's using information that it knows about me from elsewhere, from wider. It's got a wider profile of me than just that session. Because without that, it's possible that Tesco's would know certain things about me in terms of what I'd purchased previously online, or the, things that I'd looked at. But the value here comes from having a broader understanding of me in different touch points and different platforms and different areas, which is quite important. Third one, Tesla. I don't drive or own a Tesla car, for transparency, but Tesla, if you do have a Tesla car, I'm sure you know this, but they have what are called driver profiles. So what happens is you get in the car and you can set up a driver profile. At a basic level, it will remember the seat position and the steering wheel position, but also other aspects of how the car operates in terms of braking and suspension and various things like that. And so just by getting in the car and starting up the car and it recognizing that that is you, it will set the car to how you like it. And I don't know whether they've actually done it yet, but I saw a news article that was saying that these profiles will be stored in the cloud, so that if, for example, you hired a Tesla, or you were getting it repaired and you got a replacement while it was repaired, or you got it, drove somebody else's, then that profile can carry across other vehicles, and you could set up another vehicle very easily in that way. And so the reason I've pulled out this example is it's a good example, really, of personalization being around the actual product itself. So it's very easy to think of personalization in the context of marketing content and marketing information, and that's how a lot of it gets used. Like a lot of personalization tends to be, let's change what product we're showing on a banner or something like that. And yeah, that could be valuable, but personalization can have a lot of value when you're actually personalizing the experience itself. And that's where really people start to notice it. Like, it's unlikely somebody would notice a banner being personalized to them. And so it's sort of moot as to whether it would seem like a personal experience. And that's part of the point, trying to make it feel like something is personal to somebody, and that you understand them. So personalizing actual product is, or the experience itself, is the best way to do that. And the last one, Stitch Fix. So Stitch Fix, if you don't know them, it's a kind of a subscription service. I am a customer of Stitch Fix. They send you a box of clothing once a month or however often you want. And that is based on they say a real human stylist. I think it's a combination of a real person and algorithms. But what it does is it learns your style, and it learns the kinds of things that you're likely to buy. And so it will send you a small selection of clothing. And it's very good for if you're quite lazy. I don't really want to go to shops, and I don't want to troll through loads of clothes, and I don't want to, order loads of clothes and send them back and stuff like that. So, I get a box of clothes and I like some of them and I keep them, and that's it. So, but in amongst that happening, you will get emails where you will be asked, do you like this outfit? Do you like this shirt? And you say yes, no, and so it's progressively learning your preferences and the things you like. And then also when you receive things and you send them back, you give a fair amount of detail around why you did or didn't like it. And so it's gradually learning and building up a real bank of knowledge about what you like, the sizes of things that would fit you, exactly where they don't fit you. So if something doesn't fit, it will ask you, was it the shoulders or the arms or the chest? And so it's quite detailed information on that. And therefore, over time, it's gradually getting better and better at recommending things that you like. And again, and this example really kind of brings to life that sort of progressive conversation with customers. So before I signed up to this, they knew nothing about me. And if I was just to buy some clothes from another retailer, that would not really say very much about my overall preferences. But here they're asking me constantly and learning, and it's a kind of a continual conversation. So that's the point of this, is that asking people for data in a really hyper relevant way. I'm very, very happy and prepared to give information to this brand because I know exactly what it's going to be used for and exactly the benefit of me giving this information. So those are just a few examples of what I think constitutes really good personalization. Bad personalization, if there is such a thing. Now, this is a client of mine, and to be really clear, we don't do personalization for this business. So this is not an example of bad personalization. It's an example of what would be bad if we did it. And I'll tell you why. So Time for Sleep sell beds and mattresses, and that's it. So they're a fairly simple retailer in that they have only 2 product categories. And we get approached by personalization companies on behalf of this client constantly. And I have the same conversation all the time, which is I don't understand what it is that you would personalize, because when people buy beds, they don't buy beds very often. Like most people who will have a double bed in the main bedroom in the house will not change that bed more frequently than 7 to 10 years often. And so you're not repeat buying beds all the time. And when you do buy a bed, it tends to be something that people think about for a fair amount of time, but once they commit, they just go and do it. So they would just go and search for, a grey Ottoman bed in Google, end up in Google shopping, think I like that one, end up on a website, think this website seems fairly decent, the prices look okay, and they'll buy it. And it's relatively uncomplicated. So when a customer comes to this website, we don't know anything about them at all, other than the fact that they clicked on a PPC ad. They're not a previous customer. They're not having multiple visits. Might be 2, but they're very simplistic, and they will click on a few products. With that's literally all we know. So these companies that come and ask us about personalization, the only use case I can possibly think of would be, well, let's say somebody looked at beds, then if they came back to the website, then we'd show beds on the homepage as opposed to mattresses. But that's it. And that would be incredibly superficial. Like, it's not really personalization because we don't have any data on them. We don't know anything about them. There isn't really much complexity of product to actually surface in a different way anyway. So, and yet companies aggressively try and sell personalization to exactly businesses like this all the time. And a lot of what gets done in terms of personalization is exactly what I described. That is what a lot of people do and say we're doing personalization. And is that worthwhile? Probably not. This is a good example. Now, Amazon obviously are a great company at personalization. They're not a million miles off Netflix. Their strategy is based around recommendations and personalization. So this isn't to pick on Amazon. It's just a good example of how it goes astray in a lot of cases. Here's somebody that's complaining that they bought a toilet seat and then they're being emailed or targeted with other toilet seats. And it's a really good example. You know, everybody's seen retargeting adverts, particularly. You know, you look at something online and then for 2 months, you'll see display ads every time you go on social media or wherever. And the reason this is a bad example is that these things are sort of rules-based things where nobody necessarily stops to think about the exact ins and outs of that specific thing and whether that is a good experience. So Amazon, I'm sure, you know, if you bought another product on Amazon, then these emails would be useful, and maybe you do want to buy another, whatever it is, but it just wouldn't work with a toilet seat. So it's the example here is having a blanket approach that doesn't necessarily take into account individual examples. And this one, this is the last one, but this is a couple of examples of brands who have tried to allow user-generated content into their advertising strategy, which has gone really horribly wrong, and created a really quite serious PR disaster for them. So Walkers did this advert where Gary Lineker is holding up a picture and people start putting in pictures of serial killers, so on and so forth. So, and you know, it's a PR problem, but at the end of the day, it's completely superficial as well. Like, do you really want to put your own picture into an advert? You know, does it actually add anything for somebody to be showing you something with your name? And especially when you have to actually go and give your name. It's just, you know, this example is here because it exists on a much wider scale than just this kind of advertising, which is you're using personalization technology for its own sake without really thinking about whether that's worthwhile. And I guess that's the whole point of this webinar is in these cases, people have started with the technology and thought, how can we use this technology, rather than the other way around, which is what's our business strategy, how are we going to achieve it, is personalization one of those things, and if so, how does it achieve our business strategy, and therefore how do we execute it? So it's completely back to front. It's using personalization technology for the sake of it. And so you can kind of pull all those things together in, like, you know, a few sort of fundamental categories. Good personalization tends to come from business strategy. It's a way of achieving something fundamental about how your business is going to be differentiated. It utilizes data beyond the immediate session. So rather than just going, somebody looked at that and then they go to your homepage, let's show them that on the homepage, which is completely superficial. You're actually utilizing data that you know about them from wider. Now that could mean that you've got other channels that you collect data in, but it could also work if you have a lot of repeat visits. And on that, you know, moving on to the next thing, that it's authenticated in a way you need really to understand who an actual proper person is, rather than it being about a cookie, because cookies have a lot of problems with them. So, you know, really, if you're going to do things where you trying to understand people's behavior across multiple sessions, then they need to be logging in. It should, in theory, be a personalized total experience, and that might incorporate your actual product itself, not just the way you market it. And the collection of the data itself is obvious. So if you can't just gather information from behavior and you have to ask people, then that should itself be part of the experience. And the bad is really the opposite of that. It's, you know, it's very superficial. It utilizes only in-session data, is creepy, or, you know, or overly algorithmic. And finally, that it's not tested. So that's just a bit of a, sorry, let me just put some water. An overview of what I think constitutes good and bad. And I think the overarching takeout is that, you know, to reiterate, you have to start out from business strategy. You have to start out thinking, what is our, why do we exist? How are we differentiating ourselves in the market? How are we playing in the market? and being unique. And is personalization fundamental part of that? And how does it achieve that? How does it achieve what we want to do commercially? And if you can't think of why personalization can support that, then you probably shouldn't do it. And the reason being is that it is expensive to do properly. You know, the data integration aspect of it, the delivery aspect of it, you know, these things, when you do it really well, can be expensive. And that's the fundamental point, is if you go down the route of that from a superficial point of view, you could be wasting quite a lot of money. So questions, let's check for time. So there's a few questions that are quite common that I'm just going to go through. There's 3 here, and then we've got questions that we've collected or that people have asked in the Q&A, which Jen will field. So how should someone approach the strategy for personalization? Well, this is what I've been alluding to, really. Like, I think you need to sort of fundamentally start with how your business is differentiated, and how you and what is your customer experience as well, and whether personalization is an aspect of that. So let's take the example of the bed retailer that we work with, Time for Sleep. Now, beds is a fairly competitive market, but like I say, the customer experience and the customer behavior around buying beds is relatively simplistic and also very difficult to change. You can't get people to buy a bed every 3 months or every month, like they just wouldn't do it. So really, business strategy for bed retailers tends to focus on trying to win over the competition using statements about efficacy or pricing or whatever. And if you can articulate that business strategy, it's quite hard to find a place for personalization in that. You know, when you start to think, like, could you personalize the product? Well, what's a personalized bed? Or even a mattress? Like, that doesn't really make sense. Could you personalize the experience of buying the bed? Maybe. So then you kind of think about, well, how could we learn about what people's preferences are for beds? You would come up a blank with that, because you're not really going to be able to find that data or solicit that data from those people. So you once you look at it that way, you end up drawing a bit of a blank. Now, it's not impossible that personalizing the homepage of a website like that, according to what you've looked at, it's not impossible that wouldn't deliver some commercial benefit. But the question is that the most effective thing that you can focus on right now? Probably not. There are probably much better things that you can think about. And that's the point, is, you know, personalization might be worth it in all cases in some minutiae point, but is that where you should focus your attention? And back to the whole point of this presentation, you know, a lot of people rush into it because it's a buzzword, and that should not be how you prioritize the things that you focus on in your business. So I would say, you know, start with the business strategy, start with what it is you're trying to achieve, how you're differentiating, how you're playing in the market, and then think, is there a role for personalization in that? And if so, how, and where do we get the data from? How can personalization be, I'm just going to skip one. How can personalization be tested? So this is a really interesting and important point, because I don't think a lot of people consider testing personalization, which interestingly I think comes partially from the fact that a lot of software tools do personalization and testing as 2 separate things, and so it kind of has tricked people into thinking that you should do testing or personalization, and that they're two different things. But actually, personalization is first and foremost a test. So if you just take the example of thinking, should we do this fairly simple marketing personalization, then you absolutely can test that. A good sort of quite simple example of marketing personalization is when I was at Sky. We started to do basic personalization, where if you visit the website and you are authenticated, it becomes possible to know what TV channels you are subscribed to or not. And Sky's primary sort of upsell opportunities are movies and sports. And so let's say I visit the website and log in, then if the website knows that I have Sky Sports and not Sky Movies, then it should 100% be showing me adverts for upgrades to Sky Movies as opposed to Sky Sports, and vice versa. And that's a fairly simplistic form of marketing personalization, but it is using data that it knows about me from elsewhere. So it has that validity of what I'm talking about. But that can 100% be a test. Like, you know, to actually make that work, even though it's quite simple, has quite significant data challenges around it, because you've got to try and pull in that offline data into a data management platform or something like that, that will allow you to then serve the different experience. And that has cost associated with it, has effort associated with it. So should you be even doing that? And so you should always approach something like that from a testing perspective. And the best way to approach testing is always to think, what is the simplest, most MVP way that we can test this concept? And in that example, I don't remember exactly, I believe we found some really rudimentary way of doing that without actually going through all the effort of pulling in all the data, just in order to determine, is it worth doing? And that's what we do now, Jenny, further with all of our clients, is, you know, if we're looking at personalization, we try and find the most MVP, minimum viable product, if you haven't heard that acronym, way of doing it, which is, what's the simplest thing that we can test in order to prove that this works or doesn't work? But absolutely, personalization can and should be tested. And really, it's just a case of the control is no personalization and the variant is personalization. And is personalization better? And the last one is, how do you measure whether personalization is working? And that deliberately follows on from the testing example, because really the only way to do that is to have a holdout, like a control cell of people who receive no personalization whatsoever. And this, going back to this point about technology companies and vendors jumping on the buzzword bandwagon. I used to be e-commerce director of a hotel business. And again, I was approached by people selling personalization constantly. And quite a few of them, what they would do is to put a widget on, say, the homepage of the website, which would show recommended products or whatever pieces of content. And the way they would charge for that is that anybody exposed to that who then went on to buy, you would pay a percentage, a commission to them of all of those sales. Now that is daylight robbery to me, because what that's effectively doing is saying anybody who's been to your homepage who then buys, you're assuming that that's got something to do with the personalization. But it's the point I'm making is that a lot of people approach personalization as just doing it and then trying to figure out whether it works. Now, there's no way you're going to know whether it works unless you can compare personalization to no personalization. So the only way to do that is really via the same tech or methodology as experimentation, which is that you have a control of people who are not receiving any personalized experience whatsoever, and then people who do. Now, if we go back to the idea of Netflix, Stitch Fix, these companies who are fundamentally making personalization part of their business, then you're not really going to be able to do that. But the point is that this is about how do you, if you're not doing it at all, how do you get into it in such a way that you can determine whether or not it has value? So in the early days, if you're testing, then you should be running this kind of proper control test to say, like, does personalization fundamentally increase our ability to generate revenue, lifetime value, or whatever it is that you measure? So that for me is the most important thing of how you're really determining, is it worth it, which is obviously the primary question of this presentation. So with that, we'll go on to a few other questions. Jen, do you want me to go through them, or have you got them?
I have them up. If you want, I can go ahead and kind of rattle them off.
Yeah, great. If you just...
Okay, the first one is, will a cookieless world lead to server-side personalization and A/B testing? Will this leave small, medium businesses behind?
Yeah, cookies is a really, really interesting area. And I think cookies is the elephant in the room for personalization and experimentation, in a way, in the sense that it's hugely important and you don't really get that many people talking about it. There's so much nuance in terms of what that means, and it's not necessarily a given that server-side completely solves the problem. But yeah, it is an issue. It is something that the industry as a whole has to address. You know, one of the advantages of server-side that often gets brought up is the fact that you don't need third-party cookies, but actually Apple devices routinely delete first-party cookies as well, etc. So it is a problem, but just to answer the question, I don't think it really makes a difference between the size of the business. If what you mean is, you know, smaller businesses don't have the capability to go properly server-side with it, then perhaps. But you know, just to reiterate, I don't think server-side 100% solves the problem anyway, unless you are authenticating with login and things like that. So yeah, it's a fascinating area. It's something that we, you know, that everybody should keep an eye on and watch as it unfolds. And, you know, I'm sure there'll be new interesting technology solutions that come up. And interestingly, you know, SiteSpect being server-side is a tool to watch in that respect as well. But yeah, it's a very good question.
Awesome. Next question is, what are the best metrics to measure personalization success in e-commerces?
So that is so unique to your business, and that going back to what I was saying before about it should flow from your strategy, because you know, you might start out with business strategy saying, right, you know, our business strategy is to generate lifetime value with our customers in order to drive profit. So just as a bit of a backstory, I used to work with this CD sales company years ago, and I once said to them, what's your business strategy? And the guy who was the CEO, he sort of laughed at me and said, well, to sell CDs. And I was like, well, okay, but what does that mean? Are you trying to sell them cheaply, just, you know, or are you trying to sell them cheaply and then get people to come and buy them at a higher price? You know, what's your profit strategy? And he hadn't really thought about it. And surprisingly, a lot of people don't really either. They either don't think about it, or they don't articulate it, or don't communicate it within the company. But every business should have a profit strategy like that. So let's let's say you, I don't know, sell something and you're going to bring people in on a low price point with the aim of then getting them to repeat buy at a higher price point, which is where your profit will come from, then lifetime value and repeat purchase is really important to you. And if for some reason you think that personalization will increase your ability to drive repeat purchase and lifetime value, then that's the strategic direction of your personalization, and you should be measuring your personalization on its ability to do exactly that. Now, a different business could be completely different. Like a different business could be all about trying to deliver the best customer experience in and of itself and for its own sake, and therefore that's where loyalty and revenue comes from. So in a way, you'd want to measure your personalization efforts on its ability to drive customer experience as reported by the happiness of the user or whatever. So it's completely and utterly unique to the business, and a big part of the problem that I'm talking about through this whole thing is generic approaches to it, which is what gets sold by a lot of the tech companies that go out there. And so, if you're just creating some personalization and just measuring it on whatever somebody tells you when they set it up, then it's not speaking to your business strategy. So 100% should be a point of uniqueness to you.
Great. And I think you answered the second question for that guest as well. So I'm going to go to the next question. What's the most effective type of personalization? A lot of buzz on AI, ML, but curious if you think this is best or there are other more effective and accurate methods.
Again, it really depends on what you're trying to do. If you look at some of those examples, like Stitch Fix, for example, now what they're doing is they're asking you for very detailed information about your preferences, and they will have some sort of algorithm which is managing to match products together to do that. And so for them, the quality of that algorithm becomes very important. It's very similar for Netflix, and Netflix famously ran quite some years ago a kind of a competition where they had a prize of, I'm guessing, I think it was even like $1 million for anybody who could improve their recommendations algorithm, because they value that algorithm so much. But these things are very unique to, again, their very specific business strategy. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. But like AI, for example, I always think AI, what is it? Well, really, it's an algorithm. So if what you let's take a sort of a specific example, you might have personalization, meaning here's a little widget that will sit on a website that is going to recommend the 3 best possible products that this person could buy. And that particular algorithm needs to learn from certain bits of data that's fed into it in terms of maybe what you've purchased before or what you've looked at or whatever. And the maths and the statistics that go into that will be very different if you were to optimize it and perfect it than something like that Sky example that I talked about, which is literally just making a kind of a binary decision between Sky Sports or Sky News. So again, it's really important that you're thinking about what actually is personalization. What does it mean in terms of the customer experience that it's trying to deliver, and what it's supposed to actually do for us from a commercial point of view? And then is the tech and the decisioning in it the right thing to do that? And often that might be a case of having somebody quite expert at that, like somebody versed in the stats side of it and the decision side of it. But again, I know it's not a hugely helpful answer, but it depends is the answer. And it absolutely should depend on the uniqueness of what it is you're trying to do.
Great. We have a question that's kind of popular. It came up offline as well as in the chat. For businesses who are new to personalization, where is a good place to start?
So 100%, like I'm saying through this whole presentation, is before you even think about the technology, the data, or anything, sit down and think about what does personalization actually mean for us, for our customers, and you should be able to almost kind of write the story of it. So, a customer comes to our website and they're gonna see this, and it will be personalized to them in this way. And so you're almost sort of like doing it from a user experience story kind of vision perspective of like, what do you actually want that to be like at the end of the day for a consumer, and how should they feel about it, and what should they do about it, and how should that work for you? And once you've done that, if you can make that work, like I think the whole point I'm trying to make here is some businesses would sit down and they would not be able to make that work. They wouldn't be able to think it through. Like the bed manufacturer, I would, we would rack our brains for ages trying to think of that, and we wouldn't come up with anything because it's not really possible. Or if you do, it's trite and doesn't make sense. So you absolutely have to be able to sit down and think sort of almost creatively and just from a storytelling point of view about what that's supposed to look like, and then think, does that make sense for us? Does that actually work? And if it does, then you can start to think, okay, so if that's going to work like that, what would we need to know about that person? And that's then the start of the data strategy. If you need to know something that you're not going to be able to tell from their behavior, can you ask them? Would it be weird to ask them? Is it creepy? Would they even tell you? If not, is there a way that you can build that into your service or product so that it seems really relevant? How do you then get that data back into the platform to show them the thing? So you start to build the picture back up again from a very, very simple idea of what that should actually look like and how it should work for a consumer.
Great. The next question is, I'm being told to evaluate and invest in personalization over A/B testing tools, but I see them going pretty hand in hand, and A/B testing being just as, if not more important. Thoughts and why?
Yeah, really good question. They do often go hand in hand, and you've made a really great point, because exactly as I said, this is what we come across all the time, where people tend to think that personalization and A/B testing are two separate things and they have to choose between them. It's kind of absurd, really, because personalization is ultimately just something that you would do to your website in the same way that you would redesign your checkout or create a new category of products, or invest in some new photography or whatever. Personalization is ultimately a change in strategy for your website. A/B testing is ultimately how you determine what you should be investing in. So, and therefore you should be testing personalization. So they're not separate things that you choose between. You should be testing everything that you do anyway, and personalization would be just one of those things that you test. So I would 100% recommend getting into experimentation properly, and then building personalization into that testing strategy. Because if you were to say, if somebody says we should do personalization instead of A/B testing, how the hell do you know whether personalization is worth doing? It might not be. And what you will invariably find from A/B testing is that the things that you find that are really, really valuable, that work, are things that you'd never thought of before. So it's entirely possible that you would run some tests. One of them would be personalization, and personalization would be the most valuable thing that you could do. And then you'd be doing both. But it could also be the case that you run A/B testing and personalization doesn't seem to work, whereas doing something else has a massive benefit. So yeah, it's absolutely not a decision between them. And I would say you need to be running testing first so that you can test personalization.
Great. And the next question is, why doesn't server-side completely solve the problem?
Well, so if you imagine, well, so like I said when I was talking about it, it relies a lot on authentication, in my understanding, because if you arrive, let's say we're just talking about personalizing on a website. If you come to the website and you don't log in and you don't identify yourself in any way, shape, or form, then the website or the tech has to identify you, and it has to be able to identify you in a way that it can identify you again next time. And at the moment, the way that works is cookies. So your browser drops a cookie that identifies you as a machine and a browser. And then next time you come, it recognizes you. So it can stitch those two sessions together. And exactly as I was saying about with the bed manufacturer, personalization is very, very superficial if it is only aimed at something you did in that session. So it's like, you know, if I've looked at mattresses and then I go to the homepage in that same session, and then you're just showing me mattresses, that's really superficial. You know, you at least want it to be about something that I did on a previous session. So server-side doesn't necessarily solve the problem of being able to identify you as an user across multiple sessions, because you still have to have some identifier. Now, I think there are technically ways of identifying a browser and things like that, but to my knowledge, which might be wrong, they're not perfect. And actually, you know, really you want to be identifying somebody as being logged in. So that's my understanding of it, but I will transparently say I'm not fully up on the tech side of it. It's something I need to really, really dig into as well as we kind of go into this cookieless world. But yeah, you know, in a nutshell, I'd say if you're not authenticating logging in users, then we will potentially have problems. Great.
Okay, so there might be a few questions left, but we're going to go ahead and answer those offline. I want to thank Jonny Longden for joining us today. We thank all of you for attending today's webinar. For more information about SiteSpect or journey further, we encourage you to visit our websites. Thanks again and have a great day.
Thank you very much.